Noir Plasma Chrome Bleed. Unlocking knowledge, inspiring innovation, empowering curious minds.
This website makes learning so easy. I found all my resources here.
Like what you share.
Welcome to today's explainer. You know, when most people hear the word auditing, their brain instantly jumps to some tedious, mechanical box-ticking exercise. But think about your 401k, your retirement funds, or really any investments you might have. Auditing is actually the silent bodyguard protecting that money. We're talking about a fundamental socioeconomic control mechanism here. It's literally society's shield, built to fix information asymmetry, validate some incredibly complex financial realities, and ultimately keep confidence high in our global capital markets. Which naturally brings us to a pretty fascinating question, one right at the very heart of the profession. What do auditors actually do? If you ask the general public, you're going to get one answer. But look at the professional standards, totally different story. This disconnect is famously known as the audit expectation gap. It's that massive space between what people assume auditors do, like, say, absolute 100% fraud detection, and their actual socioeconomic mandate, which is to systematically evaluate evidence to protect the public interest. So, to unpack all of this, our agenda for today is straightforward. We'll start with the foundations of auditing, then move into ethics, rules and quality, followed by audit risk and evidence, completion and audit reports, and finally, the future of auditing. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the foundations of auditing, specifically its epistemological roots. Okay, let's dive into this. Modern auditing isn't just some random set of corporate rules. It's an applied academic discipline grounded in some really deep theory. Take the postulate system by Moutz and Sheriff back in 1961, laying down 8 logical assumptions about verifiability and independence. Or look at David Flint's social accountability model, which argues that the audit process has to carefully balance its social utility against its actual economic costs. But honestly, perhaps the most crucial one is Limperg's theory of inspired confidence from the 1920s. He argued that if an auditor creates more confidence than the evidence actually justifies, the whole system just collapses. Add an agency theory from Jensen and Mecklin to keep managerial self-interest in check, and it becomes crystal clear why having an independent monitor isn't just nice to have, it's strictly necessary for the economy to function. Moving right along to Section 2, ethics, rules, and quality, and the regulatory architecture that holds it all together. So shifting from the philosophical why to the regulatory how, we have to look at how these high-minded theories are enforced in the real world. And the global architecture here is incredibly strict. You've got global bodies like IFAC setting the standards for auditing and ethics, and those cascade right down to national enforcers like the PCAOB in the US. But what's really critical right now is the massive shift happening at the firm level itself. Under standards known as ISQM 1 and 2, firms have to move away from these old, static quality control checks. Quality isn't just a clipboard checklist anymore, right? Firms must now run active, continuously monitored ecosystems of quality management. But what actually happens when that quality is threatened? Well, the IESBA Code of Ethics explicitly lays out 5 threats that practitioners absolutely must evaluate and mitigate. For example, a self-interest threat pops up if a firm relies way too heavily on just one client for its fees. A self-review threat? That's when an auditor tries to audit a valuation model that their own firm's advisory division built. A massive no-no. We've also got advocacy threats, where auditors might inappropriately cheerlead for a client's position. Familiarity threats happen when a partner has been on an account for way too long, which is why we have mandatory rotation. And finally, intimidation threats, like when a client threatens to fire the firm over a modified audit opinion. In all these cases, safeguards are absolutely mandatory to protect the auditor's vital independence. So, what's our ultimate defense against these ethical threats and those performance gaps we talked about earlier? Professional skepticism. And according to Mark W. Nelson's model, skepticism isn't just a vague mindset, it is a rigorous, multi-stage cognitive process. It starts with skeptical judgment, where you're critically evaluating evidence and actively hunting for potential management bias. But here's the kicker. That has to be followed by skeptical action. You have to actually execute expanded procedures, directly confront management, or even modify the audit opinion. Without that action, the judgment is entirely useless. Let's jump to Section 3, Audit Risk and Evidence, focusing on the operational mechanics. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the actual mathematics of how auditors plan and execute their evidence gathering. We're talking about audit risk. This is the ultimate danger of issuing the wrong opinion. The formula is audit risk equals inherent risk times control risk times detection risk. Now think of inherent risk and control risk as belonging entirely to the client. They represent the raw complexity of the business and the quality of its internal controls. The auditor literally cannot change those. So to protect the public, auditors actively manipulate the only variable they do control, detection risk. If the client's risk is assessed as high, the auditor pushes that detection risk way down by radically expanding the extent and timing of their own testing. It's a brilliant balancing act. But how do they actually know what matters enough to test? They use materiality. This is the boundary line, both quantitative and qualitative, for what could actually influence a user's economic decisions. Auditors will set an overall materiality, let's say 5% of profit before tax. But they don't actually audit to that high number. Instead, they audit to a much lower performance materiality, usually around 50 to 75% of overall, just to make sure a bunch of tiny undetected misstatements don't suddenly aggregate into one massive error. They also apply specific materiality to super-sensitive areas, like executive compensation, where honestly, even a tiny misstatement absolutely matters to shareholders. When it comes to gathering the actual evidence, professional standards strictly forbid vague, generic statements. You can't just say, "We checked it." Auditors use this rigorous AMP architecture: assertion, magnitude, and procedure. First, target the specific financial assertion. Second, link it to that materiality magnitude we just talked about. And third, detail the exact execution procedure using a highly specific active verb. We're talking words like inspect, recalculate, or confirm, directed at specific source evidence. To see how that AMP framework works in practice, look at how auditors verify account balances. They don't just say, check inventory. No, they actively inspect aged inventory schedules, recalculate the net realizable value, and compare historical unit cost to post-balance sheet sales prices. Or, for the completeness of liabilities, they're out there actively inspecting loan agreements, firing off bank confirmations, and reading through board minutes to hunt down any undisclosed contingencies. It brilliantly illustrates how you translate abstract financial concepts into highly targeted, real-world evidence gathering. That brings us to Section 4, Completion and Audit Reports, where we look at the synthesis of all this evidence. All of this rigorous digging leads to the final verdict. But before they can actually sign off, global standards require the auditor to evaluate subsequent events, things that happen between the balance sheet date and the report date, and they have to meticulously differentiate between two things here. First, adjusting events, like a court case settlement that confirms a year-end obligation, meaning the historical numbers actually have to change. And second, non-adjusting events, like a major natural disaster happening right after year-end. That requires a narrative disclosure in the notes, for sure, but no change to the numbers themselves. Okay, when the evidence is finally synthesized, the resulting report is mathematically dictated by two key factors: the nature of the issue and its pervasiveness. It's a pretty strict matrix. If there's a material misstatement but it's isolated to just one area, so not pervasive, the company gets a qualified opinion, and except for a report. But if that misstatement is systemic and infects the core balance sheet, that is material and pervasive, resulting in a devastating adverse opinion. That basically tells the market the financials cannot be trusted. Similarly, if the auditor just can't get the evidence, a scope limitation, and that lack of evidence is pervasive, they have to issue a disclaimer of opinion, where they completely step away from expressing any assurance at all. Now, for listed entities, this final report also includes key audit matters, or KAMs. This standard requires auditors to explicitly disclose the absolute most significant, complex matters they wrestled with during the audit and lay out exactly how they address them. And this is a brilliant full-circle moment for us. Disclosing CAMs directly fulfills Limbrick's theory of inspired confidence from the 1920s that we talked about earlier. It pulls back the curtain, reduces information asymmetry, and finally lets stakeholders see the true rigor of the audit. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the future of auditing and digital transformations. So where exactly is all of this heading? Well, the profession is expanding rapidly right now to tackle the massive explosion in ESG and sustainability reporting. Under the new ISS 50000 standard, practitioners actually have to decide the level of assurance they're going to provide. You've got limited assurance, which involves targeted procedures resulting in a negative conclusion, basically saying, hey, nothing came to our attention. But then you have reasonable assurance, which demands the kind of extensive risk assessment and deep substantive testing we've been discussing today, resulting in a positive, affirmative opinion on the company's carbon accounting and sustainability metrics. At the exact same time, the core methodology of auditing is undergoing a massive digital transformation. We're literally shifting away from traditional manual sampling and moving toward 100% full population testing using audit data analytics. Think about it. Auditors can now execute automated routines across an entire general ledger to instantly flag unapproved weekend postings. They're using machine learning algorithms to independently evaluate incredibly complex management estimates, and they're deploying natural language processing to instantly extract critical clauses across tens of thousands of contracts. It is a total game changer. But as amazing as this technology is, it introduces some severe structural risks. Algorithmic black box models present huge explainability challenges under strict audit evidence standards. So the crucial point is this quote right here. If auditors over-rely on these automated outputs, they fall victim to automation bias. They might start trusting the machine over their own judgment, which fundamentally compromises that human professional skepticism that Nelson defined as the absolute core of the entire profession. Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought to ponder today. As we build ever more powerful algorithms capable of complete data extraction and predictive modeling, can an algorithm ever truly replace human professional skepticism? Can AI really replicate the public interest duty, the ethical fortitude, and the nuanced skeptical judgment required of a true auditor acting as society's trusted third party? Well, it's a question the profession is going to have to answer over the next decade. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the explainer, and keep asking the big questions.
Like what you share.
This website makes learning so easy. I found all my resources here.
Noir Plasma Chrome Bleed. Unlocking knowledge, inspiring innovation, empowering curious minds.